And then the Canada game between them and Denmark, Canada at this tournament, I've been burned so many times by this team. I beg you not to make me sad again. But, this Danish team is one that's playing on home ice. They got some reinforcements with Oilers. Honestly, the way this international year has gone so far, it would not surprise me to see Denmark knock off Canada. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Flights here, recapping quarterfinal action for the Men's World Championship happening in Stockholm, Sweden, and Herning, Denmark. So I'll hop into it today, of course, with the scores from today's games. And we'll talk about the Canada one later because I'm done with it. But we'll start with the other ones because I have a couple extra words I want to use on that one. So we'll start here with the U.S.-Finland game. And this was a game that, in my eyes, Finland looked really good. Unfortunately for Finland, it was only for the first 40 minutes. And, what we kind of saw in this game was Finland looked excellent, like really, really good. And then the U.S. got two quick ones at the very end of the period. And the momentum completely shifted. And there, you kind of saw the U.S. take control. And there wasn't much hope for Finland after that. Credit to the U.S. They hung in there with the Finns, who can be a very difficult team to play against, especially when they're collapsing as well as they do. And I think this game really could have won either way. And I think it kind of came down to, for this Finnish team, it was one goal away. And, maybe you look at that called off goal as one, but for the U.S., it was, a game that I think that they can definitely build on. And they're going to come up against a tough semifinal opponent in Sweden. And that's the kind of game you're going to need to play. So for this U.S. team, I thought they did play a really good game today, especially towards the very end. The back period, at least for sure, was very good. And then you could definitely draw some parts from their early parts of the game. However, I thought Finland was the better team. So for Finland, those are the kind of games that you want to win. And you play that way, the play you played in the first and the second for the full 60 minutes could be a different game. But unfortunately, those two goals really turned the tide in this one, and the U.S. will take this one 5-2, advancing to the semifinals. And then we'll move to the second game of the day between Switzerland and Austria. And for Austria, first time that they're in the playoffs, and I think it was 31 years. And for Austria, obviously, you're not expected to do much, and kind of that underdog mentality always helps. Unfortunately, they couldn't get the job done today, losing 6-0 against the Swiss. But, for Austria, still a tournament to be very proud of. Coming back and really upsetting some teams at this tournament, I think was one of their biggest takeaways, I guess, rather, from this tournament. I thought they did have a really good tournament, but unfortunately couldn't get it done in the quarters when it matters most. Game on the line. Fortunately, they weren't in their prime. So for Austria today, they will lose 6-0. And as for Switzerland, this was the kind of dominant effort you were expecting against this Austrian team. And I think for the Swiss, that's the kind of game you wanted to see played. And I think that when you look at it, that's the game, especially when you look ahead to who they're going to play and kick. Denmark, I know, I'll get there. Those are the games that you want to play. And for the Swiss, they can play that way like they did against Austria today, like they've played pretty much all tournament long, take the weaker teams out, especially early. They'll be just fine in their game against Denmark. So for the Swiss today, winning 6-0, they will also advance to the semifinals and will now move to the third game of the day between Sweden and Czechia. The host Swedes against Czechia. We'll see Sweden take this one 5-2. And in this game, I really liked the way Sweden played. And kind of looking for the Czechs, there were a couple moments where you would have liked to see a save. And maybe that was the reason why they lost this game. But to be honest, I think it really came down to the Swedes were the better team in this one. And as much as the Czechs would have, could have, should have, would have, I think that the Swedes did deserve this win, and they played their hearts out to get the win on home ice in the quarters. They will guarantee themselves a chance to play for a medal. But, for the Czechs, an unfortunate end to this tournament. You kind of think about what they had coming in. They were expected to go far, and I think you kind of look at their loss against the U.S. as a primary driving factor of that, where the Czechs play a team, if they win that game against the U.S., they then play Austria. I think that they'd be just fine against Austria, and then who knows what would happen. Instead, you get the tough draw with Sweden, and all of a sudden, it's a very, very different tournament. So, unfortunately for the Czechs, they will be eliminated from this tournament, yeah, that's no. We'll talk about Sweden. Well, I don't want to talk about this next game. For Sweden today, a very well played game, and I thought that when it all comes down to the end, you earn what you sow, and I think they really did play a strong game today, and I was very impressed with how well they looked. Especially, they've kind of seen a couple iffy games at this tournament from them. They found their groove today and got a real decisive win against the Czechs, winning 5-2. And then we move to the fourth game of the day, and it's deja vu all over again for us Canadian fans, with Denmark winning 2-1. 2-1 against Canada. And I know I typically do a very good job of being impartial on these videos, but this loss really does hurt. And for a variety of reasons, I'm going to keep that part. I'm going to try and stay as impartial for the scores part as possible. And then when we get to the news, I'll start to really dig in on this. But, Canada loses this game 2-1. They lead with, I think it was 5 minutes left, 1-0. And this was, it wasn't a great game. And we talked about it yesterday, right? For Canada, get in early, get on top, get on the board, and score goals. And that's all they needed to do. And they couldn't solve the goalie, and that's fine. And credit to the Danish goaltender. He was great again. And you're on home ice, and you're fighting against a team on home ice. And for Canada, this was the kind of game that you needed to score early and you needed to score often. And they scored precisely one goal today. And you can't beat teams like Denmark 1-0 because, frankly, they're going to score at some point in this game. And sure enough, they didn't. Credit to them. They pull the goalie. And what happens when you pull the goalie? You get some shots on net. And, of course, who else but Nikolai Ehlers to score the game-tying goal against Canada. And then deja vu again with the late goal to knock them out of the quarterfinals. Sounds familiar to me because I've done the juniors the last 2 years with another less than a minute game losing in the quarterfinals. Denmark will take this one 2-1, and credit to the Danes in this game because, the first two periods, first period especially, they didn't look great. Canada looked to be dominant. And then second period rolls around, they're a little bit more back and forth, and then the third period comes around, and Canada goes up early, but that belief never wavered. And, for Denmark, they showed a lot of heart in this game, and it looked really good on them. So, for Denmark, as much as, not expected to do much at this tournament, they'll now leave Denmark to play in Sweden. But I think it's something that you can draw and say, we won a game on home ice, and it's about building the game. And I think you're going to see Danish hockey really more or less profit from this win today. And we won't see it necessarily in the next year or two, but, 10, 15 years down the line, it's the next generation who is watching that game who will now be playing for their country. So for Denmark today, a huge win for them. They will also advance to the semifinals where they will play Switzerland. And we'll preview that game in a little bit, but my golly me, I wasn't 100% on Canada. I probably showed it in the video in the intro, which I think is what I'm going to do now. But for Canada, this game was never a lock. The Danes have been playing some really good hockey, especially of late, building up their confidence. And one of the things they did really smartly was, as the host, you get to sort of pick the schedule a little bit. And they picked their schedule well, and they picked basically their first three opponents to be ransacking games, and then the next 4 games were all wins for them, and they were playing against some of the weaker teams, and that's exactly what they needed to do, and we saw the momentum roll into today's game, and I think having the crowd on home ice really helped them in this game, and we saw that throughout. So for Denmark today, a 2-1 victory over Canada, a huge win, and they will now move to the semifinals, guaranteed a chance to play for a medal, and as we like to say in this tournament, anything's a possibility. So move over now to the news, and we'll start here with the USA with scoring goals. And one of the things that the U.S. does best, and they're about to play a real tough Swedish team in the semis. Those are the kind of games you need to play well in. And I think you got to score a lot of goals if you want to beat the Swedes. The Swedes, have had moments of they're going to score some goals, and they've had moments where we're going to be a shutdown team. And I think for the U.S., it's about catching them in between of what they want to do. And I think if they can get on the board, especially early, that could be the deciding factor. So for the U.S., continuing to score goals early, often, and always, that's going to be the trick for them. And then for Finland today, just needing 60. You know, they looked really good through about 40. Yes, you give up the 2 late goals in the second, which kind of swing the momentum a little bit. But for the Finns, they looked really, really good, but they just unfortunately couldn't get that final 20 in. They lose today, eliminated from this tournament. Then to the Swiss we go, with the path is clear. And remember back to 2 days ago's video now, we did our power rankings at the end of the round robin play, and one of the things we did was rank all the teams. And for me, Switzerland was, I think it was 4th. And their path so far is going to be the 8th team, the 7th team in my power rankings for the quarterfinals, and then some combination of Sweden or the U.S., who I think I had 2nd and 5th. So their path is now clear. We'll see what Switzerland can do. Obviously, that win in the top to take sort of the top group spot, it has come in clutch for them. And now you get a much easier opponent in the semis. You know, you don't want to be playing a team like the U.S. or Sweden. You get a relatively easier opponent in the Danes. So, you know, for the Swiss, should be interesting to see, you know, what kind of goes on there, because I think that they have a real good shot now at this tournament, especially with Canada out, to at the very least make it to the gold medal game, where it will be on them to not repeat a last year, losing the Czechs, of course, on their home ice. Very well could see another home ice team playing the Swiss. So it'll be interesting. And that's always one of the joys about these tournaments is, you know, it really is never decided till the final game, but a much easier path now for the Swiss team to make it to the gold. Should be interesting to see if they can capitalize. Then on to Austria we go with the time machine, and we'll rewind here 31 years, where we will, of course, see this, you know, Austria playing Finland, and final score, I think, was 10 or 11-0 in the quarterfinal game. That was the last time they saw this quarterfinals at this tournament. And then you flash forward to today, a 6-0 game. Not as bad, but you still get the gist. So, you know, for this Austrian team, a tough game for them. Obviously, it's an accomplishment to be in the quarterfinals, especially at this kind of tournament. But still, you know, this Austrian team wants to achieve more, and I think that this game is a stepping stone for future teams and future generations to come. So, you know, for this Austrian team, yes, it's a loss today, but it should be interesting to see what happens next. As for the Czechs, talking about what's coming up next, they're going to look ahead to the Olympics. And I think when you look at this team, at least this Czech team, there's a lot of players that you would expect to see, you know, back for this Olympic run. And I think when you kind of look at it from that perspective, it's not looking great. And you look at their goaltending, you know, you got Vejmelka, who he was okay, I guess, at this tournament. I don't know what else is going to come down the goaltending pipeline in the next year. Dobeš out of Montreal maybe could be that guy. Maybe they pull someone from Europe. But I think for Vejmelka, he's got to find his game at these kind of tournaments. And especially at a tournament like the Olympics, where, you know, you're going to get peppered with shots. You can't let in soft goals like we saw today against Sweden, because and it's not just their game against Sweden. It's kind of been all tournament, and it started in the game with the Swiss, where it's just kind of small moments of, or lapses in judgment, if you will, that really determine what happens in a game. And I think for the Czechs, you look at that, like this kind of tournament, and as much as, you know, it's not the Olympics and you don't have your best players, all your best players there, you got a lot of your best players. And I think they'll look at that, and obviously after last year's win at the Worlds, it was on home ice as well, that they will reassess and say, well, what do we need to do to get to that spot again? And just instead of it being in Czechia, it's in Milan, Italy for the Olympic gold. So we'll see what's going on with the Czechs coming up. Obviously, still quite a bit of time before the Olympics go, but that gap is quickly closing. So we will see, you know, whether or not it's going to come down for the Czechs to see if they'll be able to make that push. And I think for the Czechs, they're a team that very well could contend for an Olympic gold. Now it's just about getting out and doing it. Then we'll move on to Sweden here with good looking, and we'll see if they can continue their success into the semifinals, where, of course, they will play a real tough team in the USA. Should be a good one. Then to Denmark, we go with the Herning Heart, and I think for this Danish team, they showed a lot of heart today. You go down early in the third period, but from there on out, it was all Denmark, and it was just a matter of time before they finally snuck one past Binnington, who I might add was very good in this game. And you also score the goal in the second, which was waved off. I think it was a hand pass, and they called early, and then he still scored. But you get the gist. The Danes scored in the second, got called off. And those kind of goals can be a little bit demoralizing. And then you get the demoralizing goal as well. Early in the third, still showed a lot of heart coming back, winning the game in regulation. And once again, heroes in Herning, whatever you want to call it. The Danes do pick up the win, and now to Canada. And honestly, the way this international year has gone, and we started with the juniors, and you can go back and rewatch the juniors clip where they start by losing. Well, they beat Finland, and then they lose to Latvia, and then they lose to the U.S., and they lose to the Czechs in the quarters. Which, honestly, I think the least surprising win out of all of those was the Czechs, which is kind of surprising. But, when they played the U.S., there was still a little bit of hope at that tournament. But they nearly lost to Germany at that tournament. They nearly lost to, they lost to Latvia in overtime, or a shootout. It's just been a year to forget for Canada at these double IHF events. Yes, Four Nations was great, but still not a double IHF sanctioned event, so whoop-de-doo. And I think that when you look at it, that's not how you want to play, for this Canadian team, because they have the potential to do some amazing things at this tournament. But they just have these lapses in judgment that just, it's ridiculous. And your team this year, out of all the teams in recent years at this World Championship, this was the best team we've seen on paper. Crosby, McKinnon, you got Fleury for his final year. You get Bo Horvat, who, of course, they get injured. And you have, players upon players upon players at this year's tournament. And it's looking great. You blow through half your group in the start. You lose to Finland. I was like, here we go again. And then you come back and you play arguably your best game against Sweden, setting the tone for the quarterfinals against the rough and tough Denmark? Right, the team you should blow through because they just scratched into the quarterfinals. But no. Why would they just be a rollover? Because what team at this tournament has been a rollover? Just ask Finland. They'll tell you what happened with France. It's been this consistent problem for this team at these kind of tournaments where they take games off and all of a sudden it ends up in the back of your net. Look back to last year where then they played the Swiss. They're taking moments off in their game. And sure enough, they find themselves on the losing end. And I think today they absolutely deserve the loss. And you have players like McKinnon and Crosby, arguably two of the best players in the world, who can't seem to score a goal if their life depended on it. How many breaks did they have? Yes, the Danish goaltender was good, but still, you still should be able to find the back of the net if you are, quote-unquote, that good. It's amazing how that works. And for Marc-Andre Fleury, I think this is now his last game he will play. He didn't play in this game, of course, but this will be the last game, his last tournament game of any of his career, and you end that tournament with that performance? Are you kidding me? It gets to a point where it's ridiculous. And Canada this year at these tournaments has been ridiculous. They have been awful. Yes, even the Women's Worlds, they lose to the U.S. And it's not even the fact that they lose, it's the way they lose that really makes me angry. And yes, the U18s this year were nice to Canada. Big whoop. I think the women's U18s were nice to Canada as well. And big whoop. You come out and you play like that on the biggest stage. You lose both the World Championship tournaments. You lose the World Juniors, which is arguably one of the bigger tournaments as well. Yes, the U18s are also big deals, but not as big as, say, there's the big three at these tournaments. And now you got to go look ahead to the Olympics. And yes, you're going to get a lot of help. You look at the Four Nations team, not a very similar comp to what we're going to see here, but still, time after time after time, we see Canada losing to teams that they very much should not. And this year, there's no excuses. And, at the juniors, you could blame it on the selection committee, right? This year, there are no selection committee for you to make fun of. So for Canada, scrap this year. It has been atrocious. And honestly, I am so happy to be moving to 2026 because maybe it will be a little bit nicer. That'll do it. Yeah, good, right? Notes checked. News is done. Scores are done. Let's move to the playoff picture because I'm done with talking about Canada. We'll start here in the semifinals where we'll see Switzerland taking on Denmark and Sweden taking on the USA. I think when we look at this game for Switzerland and Denmark, this is the kind of game that you're going to need to play. And we saw this in today's game against the Canadians, where for Denmark, if they can hang around long enough, they're dangerous. And for the Swiss, they've been very good at this tournament of taking teams out, especially early. But you start to let teams come back in, and we saw that especially in their game against the Kazakhs, where, Kazakhstan kind of stuck around a little bit, and all of a sudden it seemed to be a bit of a problem for this Switzerland team. And I think for the Swiss, if they can take them out early and often, they'll be just fine. But where they start to draw some problems is, if all of a sudden Switzerland goes up, or if Denmark goes up early, and they start building some momentum. Yes, the momentum won't be as strong as they're not on home ice, but still. And I think for this Swiss team, it's all going to come down to how well they play, but also, if they can take this Danish team out early will be the deciding factor, if you will, in this game. And then to the other one between Sweden and the USA, and this is going to be a really good semifinal. We've seen this Swedish team play some very good games and some really, really not good games. Yes, they still got the win, but the point remains that they didn't play all that well. Now it's time to put their pedal to the metal because you're going to be facing a U.S. team who, frankly, is ready to go. And I think this team this year, this U.S. team, might not be the best we've seen on paper from them, but they're still a team that can score a lot of goals if you make mistakes. And I think this Swedish team is making a lot of mistakes, not so much today, but in these last few games for them, they have made a lot of mistakes and they have gotten them buried. So I think when we look at what's to come for this one, it's just going to be a matter of how many mistakes the Swedes make that the U.S. ends up capitalizing on, and vice versa. The Swedes are a team who's going to capitalize on your mistakes, and the U.S., well known for making their mistakes. And we saw that today against the Finns, where the entire first two periods, a lot of mistakes were made, and we saw the Finns sort of find some gaps, and that was almost the differentiating factor in this game. But luckily, the U.S. found those 2 goals late, and then from there, really took control of the game. So for the U.S., early, often, and always, going to be the trick for them in this one. As for Sweden, keep the U.S.'s puck out of the back of your net, and they'll be just fine. So over now to the schedule and the times for May 24th's games, which will, of course, not tomorrow, the day after. Might be tomorrow by the time you're watching this, who knows. But the U.S. will play Sweden at 8:20 a.m. Also, let me know if you're interested in streams for these games. I remember last year we did the finals for this, and we did a couple World Juniors ones a couple years back. If you're interested in that, let me know. Obviously, it's not going to be Canada, so I won't have all that much of a vested interest in it, but we could jump on the anybody but the U.S. bandwagon. I'm always interested in that. So for the U.S., Sweden, going to be a good one if you're looking for predictions. I think Sweden's still the way to go, especially on home ice, but especially we've seen it on home ice kind of crowds where if you get behind, it's a lot more difficult to get your crowd back into it. So should be an interesting game. Sweden-U.S. at 8:20, probably going to be your game of the day. Second game between Switzerland and Denmark coming up at 12:20 p.m. A reminder that both these games will be in Sweden and Stockholm, as there will be no more games in Herning. So Denmark will now lose their home ice advantage, which is slightly unfortunate for them, but I think that this likely will spell the end for Denmark and their gold medal hopes. But Honestly, I've been proved wrong before. If you're looking for my predictions, Sweden and Switzerland. Game of the day is going between U.S. and Sweden at 8:20. Should be a good one. But with that, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like, drop a like. If you're subscribing, tell all your friends about it. Down below your thoughts on quarterfinal action from the Men's World Championship. Until next time,